And that's how the journey goes.
You have been pushing boundaries at all the places you've worked at Paroma, and in a time when it was not.
Even in a very urban India, the financial matters were kept with the fathers and the uncles and at best the brothers, and the girls were expected. And in my experience, whenever I've done that, people around me have responded wholeheartedly and welcomed that with open arms. So I actually think a lot of the time we women, basically I define it more than a bias as the way things are. But my way, once again, of navigating is to go and say, hey, I want something different for myself. I don't think it doesn't. Okay, take it from me. Unless you put it out there and ask for it and work towards it, nothing automatically happens around and make things happen for you.
All right, Paroma, thank you so much for joining us. This is Women in Innovation. We've been talking to some brilliant and bold barrier breakers in technology, in entrepreneurship, and we're very honored to speak to you today. For our listeners, Paroma is the CEO of Revolut India, and I will let her share with the listeners a little about her background, what got her to fintech.
Okay, thank you for having me, first of all. I'll try and keep my introduction brief. So I come from a fairly typical middle-class big family from Calcutta. It was still called Calcutta when I grew up there. And we had a focus on academic excellence. I found my way to an IIM. From there, my career started in banking, and I was fortunate to have been associated with banking in the early years of retail or consumer banking innovations in India through the thousands, pretty much. Spent 7-8 years in banking, and then I had the opportunity in 2010 take an uncharted option to join one of the leading telecom companies in India to be a part of the team to launch the first mobile wallets. Today, that has become a norm in the country. And that was my first brush with fintech way back in 2010. From there on, one thing led to the other, joining an e-commerce company to help set up the payments and lending infrastructure for the sellers there, to getting fully into a digital lending company to make easy working capital loans available for SMEs, to now for 4 years leading Revolut Charter in India, trying to bring Revolut's best-in-class products in the world into the Indian market. And that's how the journey goes.
You have been pushing boundaries at all the places you've worked at Paroma, and in a time when it was not heard of. How would you contrast that with the larger understanding of women not having their own financial say, decision making, especially in the smaller towns? How would you contrast that, and how can we address those gaps?
Wow, amazing question, Khushbu, to start off from the bat. And that's something I really talk about because, again, as I said, growing up in a typical middle-class Bengali family, what that meant for us was also that financial matters were not discussed with the girls. It's not just a thing about rural India. Even in a very urban India, the financial matters were kept with the fathers and the uncles and at best the brothers. And the girls were expected to play a slightly different role, which most of the women will know what I'm referring to. So in that environment, to actually set my own personal ambition to go and say that while that may be the norm all around me, that's not going to apply to me. I want to know, I want to do something about it, was seeded fairly early on. And that's kind of how I've charted the course of my life and my career, that I typically don't take how things are, but I actually question why things are the way they are. And if there is something that I want to do in a particular way, or I think it should be a particular way, I actually don't hesitate from putting my hand up and saying that, hey, that's what I want to do, and that's how I want things to be. And in my experience, whenever I've done that, people around me have responded wholeheartedly and welcomed that with open arms. So I actually think a lot of the time we women tend to take things for granted the way they are and try and think of that as a constraint. Rather tn that, if there's a way in which we think it can be and ask for it, I think a lot of times we'd be surprised at how things come together.
Since you're talking about that, and since you're talking about asking, I'm going to slip in another related question before we get on to more about biases. Have you ever encountered any biases, and how did you navigate them?
Obviously, I mean, it is inherent at every stage of life, as a matter of fact. I wouldn't necessarily call it intentional bias all the time, but I think more subconscious bias. where most people have a blind spot to the fact that there may be different requirements for different genders or different abilities for that matter. Usually it's a subconscious bias, and people tend to go with the majority that they see around. So I've also had to encounter that at various stages of life. Like I was giving you this example. Let me start early on from my family or home life. Right. Again, taking that forward, all the fathers and uncles went through all the brilliant education. They held the best jobs, and all the male cousins in the family. All the women were highly educated, but played the main role of homemaker and caregiver and child rearer. And we all looked up to them. Not that we didn't. Everybody was respected, but it was clearly carved out, differentiated roles. I wouldn't necessarily call it a bias, but it was just the way things were. And people didn't have the impetus to want to challenge that or change the status quo. So right from there, I've encountered that whether at the workplace or through life in that form. Basically, I define it more than a bias as the way things are. But my way, once again, of navigating it is to go and say, hey, I want something different for myself. I don't think it needs to be that way. And I've put my hand up and asked for it, and it's happened. Like, as an example, I would, after school, I didn't want to come back home. I would go to my father's office and said, I want to just sit around next to your assistant's table. I'll do my homework, but I kind of want to hear what's going on and what office life is like. When I said that, my dad actually was happy. It's not that he kind of went and said, no, you shouldn't. He actually said, wow, is that what you really want to do? You're welcome. And that was my first eye opener, that there was a world that women don't seem to be talking about, but I felt like I belonged there. And that was the start of making things happen.
So there are these various levels it can work at, and we did touch upon at a personal level, what we can do and how we can overcome our limiting beliefs. Then there are organization level policies and initiatives that can happen. What else would you say to women who are at mid-level roles and who are wanting to grow into more senior roles? What actionable nuggets would you tell them?
So the first actionable nugget would be what I actually referred to is one, be very clear about what you want. A lot of times we women also tend to sway between the different roles we're expected to play. I think first it's inside our own head about clearly laying out what we want for ourselves and what we want our life to be. Once that is there, the second thing I would nudge women, and this is not just mid-level, but as you go along through your entire career or life, is to be able to articulate or communicate that. The second place where I think we women move upon is we tend to keep these things within our own ambitions, our desires, our dreams, our hopes, and hope that somehow things are going to come into place around us to enable us to do that. It doesn't. Okay, take it from me. Unless you put it out there and ask for it and work towards it, nothing automatically happens around to make things happen for you. So the second thing would be to clearly communicate to everybody, every stakeholder. We first spoke about whether it's in your personal life or in your organization, to your bosses, to your colleagues, to go and say, hey, this is an assignment I want to do. This is a project I want to pick up. And go ahead and communicate and do that. Here, again, I will share another example from a different workplace, a telecom company that I was working at. We were actually activating the remittance corridor with mobile money, one of the first to activate. The people who are working in urban India in blue-collar jobs, they could be a taxi driver or a factory worker in an urban location, where the family is in a rural location, and they were sending money back. Now, I wanted to know, and I'm one of those who goes out into the market and wants to be close to the consumer and study them. What are the challenges on the recipient's end in receiving the money? And I wanted to go into the interior of two of the most notorious states at that point from a security of women perspective, where a lot of such workers come from. And when I wanted to do, a lot of women also said, why would you even put your hand up and do that? But I did. I said, that's where our customers are. I want to go out there and see it. Now, yes, there is a women's security concern. How are you as an organization going to help me navigate? And I was actually given a bodyguard through that trip along with me. So that's what I kind of mean by saying that communicate what you want and what you want to do and what your constraint is. And then again, you'll be surprised at people doing things for you. So yeah, be clear in what you want, communicate clearly what you want, and be fearless. There's nothing whatsoever that we have to fear in either the workplace or at home.
That's so true. So in all these years, have you had mentors, role models you've looked up to for guidance? And how does that translate to now your stance on mentoring others?
Yeah, mentorship and role model, I think are are very, very important, and not just for women, it's equally true of men as well. Again, I will keep going back to saying one of my early role models was actually at home, which was my grandmother. She was from a different generation, of course, but she was one of those who would hitch up her sari till her knees and go play tennis with the men. So I saw it at home, this kind of a woman from a different generation who wouldn't take anything as a barrier and would challenge the status quo. So I think in a way it came a little naturally to me. And the reason I'm sharing it is if any of these anecdotes or nuggets resonate or strike a chord with anybody, to go and say, hey.
We all need those little stories of hope to pin our dreams to as well. I'm sure all listeners appreciate this.
Thanks. So yeah, so I was fortunate to have a role model close to home. But then again, my mentors afterwards have played a huge role in shaping who I've been in my organizations and in my career. And they have changed over time as well. In the sense, in my early years, I actually had a mentor and that was a role model / mentor in the first bank that I worked at, who went on to become a fairly renowned name in the industry. She was a lady who at the young age of 22, I wanted to model myself on, because she was one of those who held her own in the organization, very responsible position. She just walked into a room like she owned it. She didn't care whether the people in front were men or women, and she just knew her stuff, and she would talk sense, and she had the ability to wow anybody around. And in my early 20s, I wanted to be her. And thankfully, she was my super boss in the organization that I started with. And she also probably saw some bright spark in this youngster, and she would give me nuggets of wisdom, whether it was to do with work or it was to do with how I was navigating myself at the workplace. So I was a beneficiary of that in the first years at my workplace. How that is translated for me is today I can play that role, where I am here in my own way. I try to conduct myself as an example that I don't know, maybe the way I deal with things at the workplace, in a conference room or in a meeting or on an external public forum. If there are some people who can capture some nuggets from that is one. I can be that person to somebody else 20 years down the line. And second, when I do see bright young people, and this is actually agnostic of women or men, I proactively like to take them under my wing, so to speak, and give them a bit of a nudge here, the guidance there to help them navigate particularly tough situations that come up through the course of a long career. So yeah, learning from mentors and then converting it, becoming a mentor later, I think is a journey that we all go through and must go through.
And what is Paroma outside of work? What are your hobbies and passions that you do that perhaps feed on to your work later in the week as well? What do you do to decompress? What are weekends like?
Paroma, as a person, I am a mother to a 10-year-old. So a lot of mothers will resonate with the fact that aside from work, the first thing that your heart and mind wants to do is to spend time with them. So one of my decompress is really spending time with my son, whether it's talking to him about his day or mine, or sharing our love of books or playing. The second thing about me, that I'm a bookworm. I have a huge library at home, and I spend my time reading. And as I alluded to, I'm also heavily into sports. I'm a racket sports player. So I don't have any other fitness regimen per se, but my way to stay fit is to play sport. And that's also an enjoyment for me, time spent with the people that I enjoy the sports with. Yeah, I guess that would encapsulate at a high level.
Do you want to share a book that you read last that you liked a lot?
Book that I read. Okay, so since this is spontaneous, I'll tell you what I'm reading right now. I have a habit of revisiting a lot of classics. So currently I'm rereading Jeffrey Archer's short stories, A Twist in the Tale. So yeah, it's not that I read non-fiction. Yeah, by the way, I read a lot of fiction. To me, again, it's an escape into a different world and getting exposure to different worlds. And I'm in the habit of rereading some old favorites as well.
Coming back to work again, it is say what is exciting you for the next 5 years. There's a lot that's happening in the space, and then also policies are changing. Most exciting to you?
Exciting. I stay excited every single day of my work. So if you think about it, 10 years ago, as I said, not 10 years ago, now 15 years ago, when I started with fintech, that was the time of the era of those small handsets with push button handsets with a tiny screen on which you played Snake, and all you got was SMS alerts, and incoming calls were also charged, and outgoing was more expensive, so people would give missed calls. In that era, was fortunate to be part of the team that conceptualized where you can use such an instrument to become an instrument of making payments in finances. So we've seen that entire inflection over the last 12, 15 years. Now, I think as we look upon the next 5-10 years, one is today we still call it fintech, we still call it digital. I actually think 10 years later, when people who are teenagers are the main workforce, they will no longer call it digital payments, that will be payments. I mean, it'll become a default.
The norm, yes.
Certain things like biometrics will become a default. A lot has happened around security. We've been through the entire OTP validation generation. People have been habituated to that. But I think we'll move away from that to biometrics becoming a real way of doing things. Your eyeball scanning may be the way you do things. Third is a lot of voice-enabled work. We moved away from writing on paper to typing on electronic devices. I think we'll move all the way to voice-enabled commands across making things happen, whether it's switch on the lights or draw the curtains or make a payment from your account. I see wearables and devices getting into that. Like if I were to dream out loud, why couldn't you just take your car out, which is an automated driverless car, going in, figuring out the fuel is down, pulling into a fuel pump, automated bots putting in fuel into the car. And as soon as the amount of fuel is done, it is linked to some payment wallet from which the payment goes in. If you visualize it, it is something that can be made possible. So I think a lot of automation and use of AI in making life convenient is also going to happen. So these are some of the things that keep me awake and excited about work, on how digital is going to become a way of life, on how biometrics and voice, which will make this more inclusive, agnostic of just smartphones, then people who may have maybe differently labeled can use it as well in some form or the other. And a lot more automation, interconnectedness with technologies and devices.
And in all of this, what unique traits do women bring to these trends, to the businesses, to the world of technology? Apart from, say, diversity on paper, what is it that women bring to the table?
Actually, I don't like the term diversity on paper, because I don't think that is a lens we should apply at all, that's something that women are bringing to the table. The more pertinent is the question you actually asked: what are the unique skills that we bring to the table? One, from what I've seen in my experience of having worked with people across countries, women tend to be a lot more creative. I think it's the general maternal survival instinct that has been honed into women over eons that has led to women questioning things and being more creative about solution, and not a best effort basis. So I think that's something that women bring in. And if only women could become a lot more proactive about sharing their ideas and not be constrained by feeling, oh, what will people say? Will they think it's crazy? Crazy is what changes the world. So I think that creativity is one aspect that women bring in. The second aspect that I think we women bring in is actual emotional intelligence. The ability to want to relate to people, the ability to want to understand whether it is consumer behavior, why a consumer is doing something the way that he or she is doing or not. In terms of collaborative teamwork, why is the team thinking in a particular way and not, and to bring them together. Oftentimes you ironically see it manifest itself in various different ways in the office. Typically, you'll see if there's a party being organized, it'll be one of the women who is pulling people together, deciding the venue, deciding to order the pizza, and etc. It comes very naturally to women, but we shouldn't restrict ourselves to support roles, if you know what I mean. To bring that mainstream and go and use that emotional intelligence to bring to specific larger purposes within the organization. So that's the second thing where I think women bring an inherent strength. The third inherent strength that women bring,